Welcome to DoubleDM, the TTRPG talk show with a focus on game mastering and helping you be the best game master you can be. I don't want to talk too long, cause you can probably hear that I am quite sick right now. However, I need to tell you that today's episode is us talking to Greg Tito and Shelly Mazzanoble from DragonTalk, the official Dungeons & Dragons podcast about their book, Welcome to DragonTalk. Say that 3 times in a row. Anyway, Shelly and Greg have been amazing guests, sharing incredible, insightful, and inspirational stories for years and years, and it was an honor to get to speak to both of them for our show. So without further ado, let's talk about making your TTRPGs better with Shelly and Greg and the inspiring stories made possible by this very hobby.
Hello and welcome to episode 93 of DoubleDM podcast. With me, as per usual, is my lovely co-host, Emil. So, Emil, how are you doing today?
I was still sipping my tea, so I am doing great, aside from the fact that I'm sick and that I have reality and existential dread come crashing around me. No, I'm doing great.
Okay. So, any special things happening this week or has happened this week for you?
Special things, no. Well, aside from the fact that I'm sick and don't want to do anything, I still am here to record an episode. I'm still here to record an episode, and I'm also still ready to play TTRPGs whenever I get the chance to. For example, I got to play on Tuesday, and I get to play today on Thursday. And I also have a session 0 coming up on Friday. I have a session coming up on Sunday. So a lot of TTRPGs.
Amazing. Mine isn't that much different because I had a session on Monday, a special Halloween one-shot we did, then the session today on Thursday, the session 0 on Friday, and another session on Saturday. So, yeah, a lot of TTRPGs for me this week.
Yeah, I mean, TTRPGs are great, and it's kind of the reason why we're here, so...
Yeah, but tell me a bit more about your session on Tuesday, when you got to play.
Well, I was still the game master for that.
Okay.
Hold your fucking horses, Steve.
I mean, dream, right?
I don't play that often. So yeah, Tuesday was my Tyranny of Dragons game, as is every 2 weeks, and my players were still at the point of defending Neverwinter from attacking cultists and dragons. And in the last session, they were facing down a green dragon on a bridge, and this green dragon didn't want to let them pass, and used its breath weapon to its full potential. I think the thing is, right, when you have these monsters like dragons or mind flayers or beholders or something like these epic monsters, they are actually a very, very tough fight for your players, regardless of the level, if you play these creatures to their full potential. And this green dragon, I modified them a bit, so they had a lot of jumping and they had a lot of movement underwater. I modified the stat block to fit this combat to make it interesting. And this dragon didn't stay on the bridge. Every time it felt danger, it just dove back underwater. And then for 2 to 3 turns, I just did something very horrifying to my players, because this dragon just attached to the bridge from underneath and used its breath weapon up. And since the bridge was so narrow, it could go up on the sides and basically still get the cone area on the bridge.
Oh, damn.
So they had this dragon basically stuck under the bridge, trying to break the bridge and killing the PCs on it. And whenever they tried to run further up the bridge, the dragon would just move in front of them again and just block their way again. And it was very hard for them to fight this dragon until 3 players basically unlocked their wings. We have an Asima that has wings, and we have 1 player that can cast fly on himself and another player, and as a warlock. And so when these 3 people started flying, they were able to fly down to the level where the dragon was hiding under the bridge and were able to shoot it. But then the dragon let go of the bridge back into the water, and because this water was muddy and kind of not very clear, they couldn't see the dragon. And then the PC that was the lowest above the water level basically just got jumped from below the waves by this dragon and snapped, and then the dragon fell back into the water. I just loved this fight, and my players were really horrified by this creature not facing them on even grounds, because if one thing I realized for D&D combat is if you're facing a foe on even ground, the players are most often way favored in that fight.
Yeah, and especially with the monsters you mentioned, like dragons, beholders, or mind flayers, they are very, very smart beings. Yeah. They know how to engage in a battlefield in the perfect way for them. And especially in a critical situation where they don't just want to taunt the party, why wouldn't they?
Yeah, the thing is, right, if I had this conversation with Derek, actually, a very short conversation on Twitter, just like 2 to 3 tweets long, with Derek from DMDM Studios, who we had on the show before, about if I play my monsters to the best of their ability, especially these legendary monsters that have a high level intellect and have a lot of tools at their disposal to dispose of characters, I can wipe my players every single fight. Yeah. It's very easy to wipe your players with a red dragon that just rains fire down on them without ever getting in melee for the fighter. And I have a fighter that has no ranged weapons. If I put an ancient red dragon or a normal red dragon against them that flies overhead and shoots fire down whenever its breath weapon recharges, those 2 players are useless. And that completely throws the combat out of the window. It's very easy to kill your player characters with monsters that basically obey the tactics that are kind of given by their features. And that's why most of my monsters do not fight to the best of their ability. Because if they would, every single combat could potentially end in a TPK, and I do not want that. Sure, I want there to be the chance of death, and that happens even in not combats where I play the monsters to the best of their ability because of just decisions made and damage dealt and luck, and sometimes also, sometimes the monsters do obey tactics like Focus 1. If I have a group of Knoll Hunters, they didn't spread their fire across every PC evenly, because that would be an idiot move. You would need 3 rounds to kill a PC, but if you have 4 people hitting the same PC, that they go down way more quickly, and they would do that. But that's the thing, because players always, I think it's just the thing that players always play to the best of their abilities, because obviously they would. But you as the GM, if you play to the best of your abilities, which arguably you should, but also shouldn't, and that's kind of weird to me. That's something I really need to think about, because I want the combats to be deadly, but I don't want them to end in TPKs all the time, because if I have a flying creature with fire resistance, 2 players are useless in my group. And do I want that? Sometimes yes, maybe. But sometimes that also just means that 2 players are sitting there for an hour and a half in the combat not doing anything because they know their characters are useless and they can just try to hope for something. But alas, right? Yeah. We're not here to discuss something. We already have an episode topic. We have a lot of sessions coming up. Is there one you want to talk about? What is one session you want to talk about in this recap? I don't think that we have time to discuss everything.
Yeah, actually, I'm very interested in my session on Saturday. Okay. Because we finished the part where it was a pre-written module from the GM. We run Lost Mines of Phandelver to get to, because we had one new player and get along and get to know our characters really. And now we're diving into the, let's say, open world that our DM completely homebrewed himself for the first time.
So it's not the Sword Coast.
No, it's not the Sword Coast. He just put the module of Lost Mines of Phandelver somewhere in his world, but we don't actually know exactly where yet.
Yeah, obviously not, because you didn't know the world before.
Exactly.
Typical GMing.
Yeah, I think the GM didn't know that either.
Obviously not, right?
Yeah, I mean, ask me anything about the part of my world where I play in with my groups. I can tell you some stuff, but definitely not everything. But any other part of the world is just,
I mean, the thing is, I think that's wrong what you're saying. Because I can ask you about every place and you can make shit up in the moment.
Exactly.
Right? But I ask you a question, how is the government in this part of the world? And you just say, well, it's dominated by one family for over 700 years. It's some kind of dynasty, and basically the oldest person living from that family rules. Boom. And I wouldn't be able to tell if you made that up in this moment or before, right? And that's the thing. That's all there is to GMing. Just making it up in the fucking moment.
Yeah. But so I'm excited to see where all of the world is leading us, what we can do now and all of that stuff.
Also, one thing, once again, it's Lost Mine of Phandelver.
Lost Mine of Phandelver.
It's one mine.
Yeah.
I know I'm nitpicking. I know I'm pedantic, but I need to be, because it's just one mine. It's not mine.
Yeah, lost mine of Vandelver. Anyway, I'm interested to see where all of the things in the world are taking us.
It has to happen. I mean, especially if today's episode features 2 people from Wizards of the Coast, we should at least get the facts straight that it's lost mine of Phandelver. Because in this episode, as you probably already have guessed by title, description, and probably pre-show, we are actually joined by Shelly Mazzanoble and Greg Tito from DragonTalk to talk about their upcoming book, the show they are making, what they do, how they got into TTRPGs, and so much more different stuff about how this hobby and the people that play it are inspiring everyone around them to just create, play, and have fun. And I think without further ado, we should actually jump in to talk to them. Hey, dear listener, we arrived at this episode's mid-roll. I don't want to keep you too long in this break from the usual program, but podcasting overlords demand that I ask you to rate and review our show to help us expand our reach and get new listeners. But also with more reviews and ratings comes the benefit of us getting a better feel for what you like and dislike about the show, allowing us to improve our show to the next level just for you guys. And hey, if you really like the show, then recommend us to your friends so we can share our content with them and help them with whatever dungeon master dilemma or player problems they are having right now. I know you hear this all of the time, but really doing so helps shows like ours and any other podcaster, especially indie podcasters, out immensely in creating the best content possible. So again, rate, review, tell a friend or whatever works for you. If you are feeling super generous today, you can check out our Ko-Fi and donate a few bucks towards upgrading the show with new microphones, editing software, and studio surroundings. No pressure at all though, this is just if you feel like you want to help out. Lastly, I also want to tell you guys about our social media channels and that you can follow us on especially Twitter or Instagram to stay up to date with the show and get a whole slew of other content like memes, tips, and general shitposts about TTRPGs and the TTRPG industry or community. Thank you guys so much for your constant support of our show, and we hope we can continue creating amazing content for you guys well into the future. Oh, one last thing, if you have a TTRPG product you want to advertise on our show, contact us about affordable ad space on DoubleDM episodes, and we also have promo swap spaces available for other podcasters and shows. And with that, I have an advertisement for you, and after that, it's right back to the show. Do you want a lightweight, easy to use, and free application for your tabletop role-playing campaigns? MasterScreen is the ultimate set of tools for running tabletop or online role-playing campaigns and managing intricate fictional worlds as well. This incredible browser application can run on any device and also works offline so you can edit your files basically everywhere. This awesome campaign manager allows you to level up your notes and organization so you have to spend less time in your notes and more time in the action of your games. The focus on the simple yet beautiful design makes for great and intuitive use for every tabletop role-playing game, and as time goes on there will be even more features to create a one-stop get-all for game masters wanting to level up their game. And remember, all of that is for the low price of free and requires no downloads. So go to masterscreen.app to start becoming the master behind the screen you were meant to be. You can find the link in the description.
And then, without further ado, now just let's dive right into the episode. We have 2 amazing guests with us today, Greg and Shelly, but please, I want to give over the introduction part to them. Please, introduce yourself. Who are you? What do you do? How did you get into TTRPGs? All of the good stuff.
You go first, Shelly.
Oh, well, thank you. Hi, I'm Shelly Mazzanoble, and by day, I am the senior brand manager for Dungeons and Dragons, and I guess also by day, co-host with Greg of the official Dungeons and Dragons podcast, DragonTalk, and by evening, I co-wrote a book with Greg about DragonTalk, which is called, appropriately, Welcome to DragonTalk, and there is a very long subtitle, which I always have to look up. Inspiring conversations about Dungeons and Dragons and the people who love to play it. Never really thought that I would be here writing books about Dungeons and Dragons, because I came into the TRPG world as an adult late in life, kicking and screaming, because I just did not think incorrectly that Dungeons and Dragons was a game that I would be into. And I was so wrong until my employer pointed out that they actually published Dungeons and Dragons and I should learn how to play it. Yeah, it took just mere minutes into my very first D&D game to realize that I had been so wrong, so very, very wrong my entire life, and that Dungeons and Dragons really was a game for me and really for anyone who just enjoys spending time with friends, telling stories, playing really heroic, fantastical, way better than you are versions of yourself. There's a lot to love about this game. So
Yeah.
I have spent every moment since repenting for my incorrect assumptions about D&D and trying to change everyone's perception if they think D&D is not a game for them, because it is.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I am Greg Tito. I'm very excited to be the co-host of Dragon Talk with Shelly during the day, as well as Senior Communications Manager for Dungeons & Dragons at Wizards. Very excited about all the stuff that Shelly just said, but I'll just give my quick overview of how I got into D&D. I was a fan of fantasy when I was a kid. My brother showed me The Hobbit, the animated Rankin Bass version, when I was probably like 4 or 5 years old, and he was reading the book and he was telling me all the details about the writing of Tolkien that didn't make it into the animated series, and I was like, that's really fascinating. Oh, I want to get into that. So I started reading it myself at a very young age, and I got hooked on fantasy ever since then and devoured as many young adult fantasy novels as I could, and probably some more adult ones before my time. And while I was looking for more fantasy novels on my brother's shelf, I found a Dungeon Master's Guide that was very worn, had some dog-eared things on it, and I was kind of intrigued because my brothers didn't play. They didn't know much about it. They didn't introduce me to it. I just kind of found it on their shelf. We later discovered that it probably was a hand-me-down that I'd gotten from a neighbor. Otherwise, it would not have been allowed into my house. It was like this box of things that we kind of just inherited. And when I showed interest in playing, my mother was a very religious person, still is a very religious person, and was like, no, I don't think we're going to facilitate this part of your hobby or your interest. They try to steer me away from fantasy as much as they could. Unfortunately, that siren's call was strong. Even throughout high school and college, I did not really participate in them. I did a lot of theater, and it wasn't until I was living on my own in New York City. I was married. I was making as much creative output as I can in plays and things like that. And then I was like, well, wait a second, I can actually play D&D now. I don't have anyone telling me no. And so I found a group, and it was this wonderful meld of creative people as well as longtime fans of D&D, and they learned me on all of the lore of the Greyhawk world at the time, because it was during the 3.5 era, and I was hooked, similar to Shelly. Like, I was like, oh man, this is what I was dreaming of when I was a kid, is being able to embody these characters that I loved as much as I did in passive entertainment, like movies and television. So I loved it, and I just started writing about it as much as I could. I tried to write I did write some RPG materials, try to pursue that part of the career, and then I started writing for a games website about video games, obviously not necessarily D&D related, but I was always pitching D&D stories. I was always trying to be like, there's something here. There's something really magical about role-playing games that is similar to video games, but very much, different, and wrote as many stories as I could around D&D. And then when that job kind of ended, I was very lucky enough to know Shelly. We had been in a few panels together at PAX East and other places, and kind of got the job to sell Dungeons & Dragons, to spread the word about how much D&D is great. It was not a big leap for me, because I, like Shelly, believe it is so important, and people who play it, generally better people, because they are able to have empathy. They're able to walk in other people's shoes. They haven't lost that sense of fun and gaming and adventure. So many of the D&D players that we know out there still have, even in their adulthood, and was happy enough to be invited to be on a podcast in 2015 that morphed into Dragon Talk and has become a big facet of what we do at Wizards, is getting people into this game through normalizing this idea that you don't necessarily have to be a D&D person. You don't need to have that as your, even though so many of the people that we love do identify so strongly with this game, you can be a multifaceted person. You can love reality television if that's your bag, like it is for Shelly. Or you can like sports, and you can like other things. You can like art. You can like, have many different disciplines in your life and still get something really, really great out of D&D. And so what this book is all about, as well as the podcast kind of in general, has been about breaking down those barriers, those stereotypes, those things that people used to associate with D&D. And now, thankfully, it's just cool. It's just part of, the amazing people out there are creative and always building and making things happen. So that's my story and how we got to where we are now.
Two things. One, I think DragonTalk is nearly as old as I started playing TTRPGs.
Oh.
Because I think I started in 2014.
Oh, yeah, right around
when
there.
I was 15 years old.
Aw, baby.
Aw.
And I relate to both stories, kind of, because I was dragged in by a friend. Didn't think I would enjoy it much. It kind of was like, why aren't we just doing a movie night or something, right? Why are we not just doing a board game night? Why this? But we were on a school trip, on a week-long school trip, 8th grade. And my friend said, I have this very cool game and we can play it in our room at night and stuff like that. And we created characters on the train. And then I was like, does this really sound like fun to me? And then the first 5 minutes were some of the most magical things that happened to me in my life. On that, in that 5-person small packed room of teenagers sitting there, while in the other rooms, the other teenagers were blasting loud music. I don't know, chugging their first beer, even though they weren't allowed to on this class. While we were in the other room playing fantasy games.
Yes.
So many things happened because our teachers, obviously, since we were only 14, 15, they obviously came into the room to see if we were all also sleeping, right? They needed to make sure that we were sleeping and that we weren't doing anything bad or illegal or not allowed for us. And then they came into our room and like opened up and, wait, you aren't sleeping? We didn't hear anything. The other rooms are all loud, lasting music and you hear the people talking and they're like, we don't hear you talking because we're sitting around a table with one of our friends telling a story and the rest of us like encapsulated by it. But I relate to Greg's story kinda as well because when I got back, I was kinda scared to tell my parents about this hobby because I didn't think that they would understand it and would necessarily like it. And then I found out that my parents actually played the same TTRPG before I was even born.
What?
Wow.
I found the first edition of the German fantasy The Dark Eye in my room in a drawer that I never opened before, where there were these old notes of the first adventure that was ever released, where my father, my mother, my uncle, and my aunt played together.
Wow.
And then I realized what cool people my parents actually are.
I hope my kids think the same thing.
I know.
It's like you found a treasure. Like you open it up and you're like, oh, I'd never been in this drawer before. Like what an evocative
look at your
story.
room. That's a whole fucking treasure chest right there.
That's right. I know, right?
I feel like that should be a commercial. Like that would be like just like the best advertisement for this game. My parents are cool.
I mean, the fun thing is I actually then organized a play with their old group of that TTRPG with me as my first game master experience. I was terrible at it.
They were
probably somewhere.
so proud, though. It probably was a really big moment for them, too.
They enjoyed it a lot because they got the group back together and it was really like a homecoming for them and it was a good experience for me, even though I really botched everything that you would think. Every video that you can look up on YouTube, every podcast episode where you have, don't do this as a dungeon master. I did it.
I've been there.
Gotta do it once. You gotta, all right? You gotta fail. I mean, and that's part of what I think D&D actually teaches people too. It's something that is really interesting is that the failures, rolling a 1 or not making that attack happen or losing a character or having a TPK, as we were talking about before we started recording, like those are really evocative memories. And you learn from failure almost more than you do from successes. And it's such great storytelling. And it's something that is really important to grok when you're a kid as well. Like, okay, it's okay to fall on your face and in front of your friends and allow them to pick you back up and lift each other into hopefully succeeding by the end, or in a TPK situation where you're just like, okay, well, that didn't work out. We'll start again, and we'll tell a different story and we'll make it even better. And, like, I think there's so much there for our lives where you don't have to necessarily be like success driven all the time. It's okay to see failures and do them the way they need to do. And it became, the formation of you being a good dungeon master going forward, I hope.
And now I'm on a fucking podcast that is all about game master advice. Right? D&D taught me so much and I'm so happy that I actually got to play it as a kid where I was very impressionable and had to learn a lot of different things because it taught me a lot because I got to play in a safe environment environment with my friends and a very caring dungeon master who's actually listening to this episode. So hi. But he just made sure that we get these experiences in a very safe environment at his table, but we could work through them. Something that you as a 14, 15-year-old kid just wouldn't encounter in life.
Totally.
But it helped. It taught me a lot about understanding other people. Like you said, it taught me so much empathy that I didn't have before at all. Because where should I have learned that before? But TTRPGs, D&D teaches so much empathy and understanding other people, which is why I think that this game is so freaking inspiring and should be played by everybody, just like you guys said before.
Yeah.
It should. It really should.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say that I was the exact opposite of Emil's encounter in my first TTRPG encounter. I was like, okay, I want to play this game, and I would drag everyone I know with me into that rabbit hole, and this group is still playing today at some parts, and just dragging everyone down in quotation marks or up with me in this case.
We say lift you up
Exactly.
on DragonTalk, right? You're like, no, you're bringing the Peller's work to them.
Exactly, and just giving everyone a creative outlet that I kind of felt was lacking for them, and I felt especially TTRPGs are an amazing thing to do exactly that, having a creative outlet, and then it just worked. We all just clicked, and the whole group just vibed with it. We didn't know shit because every one of us didn't know a single thing about TTRPGs. We just started, and then it just went uphill from there.
Gotta start somewhere.
Gotta start somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, that's like for a game that has a lot of rules, a lot of rule books, we just keep cranking them out here. But we always tell people you don't have to know any of them to start playing. Like, just don't worry about it. Just sit down. Literally just sit down. Somebody is going to teach you and is going to tell you when to pick up that die and which die to pick up and what to roll and what to add to it. And then carry on. Everybody knows how to tell a story. Don't worry about it. And even for DMing, and I don't know, Emil, if this was part of your the first time you said you were terrible, but I think that the less you try to prepare, then the better you're going to be at it. Because I over prepared for my first time.
Oh, totally.
It never occurred to me that the players wouldn't just know what was in my head and follow that. They just did their own thing. And I was like, well, I don't know. I don't know what's there. You guys went in a different direction, like literally and figuratively.
I mean, I have, after that, I've GM'd a campaign for new time players and friends as well, and not these adults that have played before, and more my friends. And I've written out entire dialogue trees for NPCs because I was not prepared to improvise dialogue for them. And I then realized that why do I even need this? I can now do this improvisation. And I learned that I don't need to do this. I don't need to over prepare. I should rather under prepare or not prepare too much. And I think generally what we're talking about here right now is, right, the most important step you need to take is the first step in doing it.
Yeah.
Start being a dungeon master. Start being a player. Just pick up the book. Even if you don't know all the rules, start playing. You can always learn the rules later on and then still play after them if you want to. But you need to start somewhere. And if that is somewhere where you're not knowing the rules at all, then that's that. If you want to know all the rules beforehand, then read the book. That's also the first step. But on the topic of first steps, I want to talk about DragonTalk, especially the history of the show. You said you started in 2015. And I want to just, one of you guys walk me through how DragonTalk became this show about the inspiring people and the stories of these people that play or create or work in D&D and the cosmos around it.
Yeah. So we had to do a lot of research when we were writing this book, because we were like, wait, how did this begin? How did it? Because it happened pretty organically. The podcast feed that we're currently on right now began as Acquisitions Incorporated it started with James White and then Chris Perkins taking over with the Penny Arcade folks, and having that first kind of, at least my first experience with listening and consuming people playing Dungeons and Dragons, while not being in the room myself. And that was, very popular. It's gone on to be more of a live show. You see it at PAXs all over, and it continues to inspire folks to jump in and start playing D&D. But somewhere along the line, people within the Wizards of the Coast office came in and being like, oh, we can do some interviews with designers. And then it was Bart Carroll and Shelly, before my time at Wizards, started doing more discussions with third-party people and invited a few other folks to kind of be outsiders and be really exciting folks who are not necessarily part of the TRPG community or not thought of. And Dan Harmon is one of them, who created Community. So I'm really excited that we have a essay in the book about that Shelly wrote with the two of them interviewing him before my time, before I started. And then when I like I said, I was a journalist, so I was all about making content. Before I came on at Wizards, and Shelly randomly just said, "Oh, we're going to do a podcast. Do you want to come and join with us?" And I was like, "Yes, please, sure, that sounds great. I would love that." And I think there were 4 hosts for that first episode that I was on, and like only one person there, and it was a little bit like, "Oh, well, I'm not really sure what the plan is here." And I was able to use a lot of my skills from creating content. I was like, let's brand this, like let's get on a regular schedule, so we're coming out with episodes every week, and let's expand the interviewers. Obviously, we still want to talk to people within the building who are making D&D, because that's really fascinating, and our fans always want to kind of get inside their brain on why they were choosing to do whatever they were choosing to do about with the D&D books. But we really started to latch onto the idea of the folks outside of the Wizards of the Coast building who are playing D&D. And I mentioned this in the book, I started in 2015, as I mentioned, in March 1st, the same week that Critical Role started broadcasting on Twitch. So it was at this moment when so many people started to get drawn into this hobby through watching people play Dungeons and Dragons, right? So the obvious super popularity of Critical Role, but then other groups and people started to do that as well. And we just huge growth in people who were showing off the breadth of games that you can play in Dungeons and Dragons. And we started to invite them on and talk to them and be more a part of that community and build up folks who may not have gotten notoriety yet and try to, shine more of a spotlight on them. And that morphed and changed into the DragonTalk that it is now, right? Where we are making it a point to try to bring in new people through the entire concept of you don't need XYZ in order to play D&D. All you need is an imagination and a desire to hang out with your friends, and great times ensued from that. So yeah, that's where DragonTalk kind of came from. And again, we do go into like a lot more detail in the book itself.
And regarding that book, you mentioned that a couple of times, but what exactly is the book?
It's a book about a podcast about a game.
What's not to understand?
The mediums combined.
It is.
Yes,
You just need a
everything
TV
at
show
once.
of it now.
It's a meta,
Yes.
everything everywhere all at once, but in book form.
It is. It is. Yes. It is. Now that it's done, it's a thing. It feels like, yes, of course we should have written a book about the people who love to play Dungeons and Dragons, because those people are what makes this game so interesting and what makes this community so interesting. But it started because we were approached by an editor at the University of Iowa who she had read my 2 previous books on D&D. She was a DragonTalk listener, and she was like, I think there's a story here. I think this is really interesting, like how this podcast got started and like maybe the creative process behind it. But, knowing that D&D was picking up a lot of steam and in general, like geekdom was, becoming something that was becoming more mainstream, and also something that she was looking to have more titles on their list about, pop culture and geek hobbies. So we kind of fit right into that. And we thought, yeah, we could see that there's definitely a story here, but we put together our own proposal. And that was really like the focus was meant to be on the people who we've had the pleasure of talking to over the 7 years. I guess at the time we started writing it was only 5 years, but I don't even think we had our 300th episode then, but we obviously had a wealth of interviews that to pull from here. And one of the things that I think is so impressive about this community, and especially the small slice of it that we get to see and talk to on DragonTalk, is it really does speak to the whole message of D&D is for everyone. And we wanted to showcase the diversity of the people who play this game, the reasons why they love to play this game, the content that they're creating that is tied to this game, or maybe it's just they're not creating specific D&D content, but they're in a field that they got into because they were inspired by D&D. Like a lot of the people we talk to are people who work in Hollywood. They're animators, they're directors, they're actors, they're writers, they're showrunners for television shows. And they're all like, yeah, my love of storytelling developed when I started to play D&D when I was 10 years old. And I'm really good at creating characters because I've played D&D for 30 years. Or we've learned that showrunners on TV shows are essentially dungeon masters. I mean, it's so similar, all of those skills that both have. So that was really important for us, was just to get to pick some of the essays. That part was hard, was narrowing down the ones that we wanted to talk about, but to pick some of the essays that really spoke to Greg and I, we had connections to several of the people that we had interviewed, or connections to some of the stories that they were telling, or related in different ways. And those were the ones that they kind of rose to the top. Like, yeah, I want to recount this particular episode because it touched me in a really big way, or I really enjoyed meeting this person, or something significant happened, both of us had different reactions to different episodes. Even though when we came up with our list of who we wanted to write about, we really didn't even have that much crossover, so that we didn't have to like fight over the essays. It was really interesting too, because I've learned a lot about Greg through writing this book, through reading his essays, and even just seeing like, oh wow, I didn't realize that you had left that interview and went back to your desk and were like having all of these emotions and feelings about what we had talked about. So the goal is really that whoever's reading this book, whether you're someone who loves D&D or someone who's never played D&D, or even if you have never listened to the podcast, you're just getting a small slice of seeing who the people are who love and play this game, and the reasons why this game has had such a huge positive impact on the lives of so many.
Nice. Really. It fills me with so much joy how you guys talk about your book.
We love our book.
Amazing.
We love it so
It's our
much.
little book baby.
Especially since you talked about it just now, Shelly, that some interviews obviously left you guys yourselves inspired or changed or gave you a new perspective. And we actually had written down a question about this. We don't want you guys to name any favorites of your guests, because obviously all guests are the favorites.
Thank you for
That is
acknowledging
true.
that.
That is true.
We couldn't pick a favorite guest, but there are still a few episodes that touched us more than because of the things that were talked about.
Yeah.
So off the top of your head, if you want to, could you name a story or a guest that is maybe in the book or maybe even not, that really touched you and moved you in some way? If you don't want to talk about that, that's fine as well, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I'll jump in and say the one I wrote around the interview with N.D. Stevenson, who was the creator and showrunner of the animated series She-Ra, Princess of Power on Netflix. We had talked to their partner before, Molly Knox Ostertag, and it was really interesting to hear ND talk about her relationship with Molly, as well as growing up queer and not having stories that felt like they were, as a kid, that felt, for kids animation, that felt like they were true to not necessarily their specific experience, but like the experience of what it's like to have a friendship that changes. And is it romantic? Is it not romantic? And have things that happen like that. And I was really touched by that because one of my daughters had an experience when she was young, where she had a friend that ended up their relationship changed. It did not go the way she had thought, and she thought that she had done something. My daughter thought she had done something wrong, and the way that it went, and the relationship ended. And my daughter was really kind of sad and emotional by that. I didn't know how to talk about that with her, and it wasn't until we were watching She-Ra, Princess of Power, that we were able to kind of really understand that is a more universal thing. People don't, so much animation out there is about the power of friendship and family and blah blah blah, and like it's always great. They don't really talk about friendships ending and what that can mean, and it can feel like a breakup. And if it does feel like a breakup, what does that mean? Like, what, as far as sexual orientation early on, like some people understand that very early, and some people don't, and that changes. And so the lens that ND was able to show with us, as well as how much D&D and the play of D&D was infused in the creation of that show, which I was unaware of. I mean, we kind of like, had some thoughts about it, but we didn't realize like sometimes the play sessions that that they had with their partner ended up having almost direct impact on some of the plots of the episodes in the show. And I was like, oh, that's always eye-opening for me too, when D&D play directly inspires stories. And so, yeah, I write about that in the book and relate that story about my daughter, because it really did And even when I was in the interview with ND, I was getting teared up and extremely emotional just talking about it. And so I wanted to kind of do that justice in the essay. I'm not sure if I did, but I really enjoy just being able to explore that because, emotions are a very important part of human life. Sometimes as men, we don't get to really express that very much. So being able to have that moment with a creator who made something that was really impactful for me and my family and my daughter, while all talking about it under the guise of a D&D podcast is, to me, that is such an emblem of what this book is about, what our podcast is about, and what I think the D&D community is all about.
No, but for real, right? D&D made me cry so many times, right?
Totally.
I love that. I want that on a t-shirt. D&D made me cry.
I was kind of a stoic kid, like many of my friends were, but through playing TTRPGs, we understood that these feelings of sadness, of crying, of losing a very beloved NPC or player character, that's still a sad feeling, and you're allowed to feel sad about it. And sometimes crying is the best way to get that feeling out and shouldn't be shamed upon. And D&D was one of the big reasons why I realized that. So I definitely resonate with that as well, right? D&D has helped me in understanding how to deal with my emotions. And if I play D&D with my friends, I always have a great time, even though I might be crying.
Right. Just like you can cry at a movie or cry at something like that, right? Like it can feel, very real, but almost more so because it's, like you said, your beloved character or your, beloved thing. It can be even more impactful. I love it.
Just being in a safe space and invested into the story and into the characters that are taking place in that universe that you are playing in just helps you, or helped me at least, to figure out some emotions or putting a finger or putting it into words, what I felt, because I had that safe space where I can experiment with how to express these feelings.
Yeah.
It's so, there are so many. I'm going to try to pick one, though, that we haven't already talked about. Eventually, Greg and I will just talk about the whole entire book and nobody will even have to buy it. So we had interviewed Giancarlo Volpe. He is a director, an animator, producer, and I think at the time it was Avatar: The Last Airbender, which was on Netflix, that was airing. And I can't remember how we had discovered that he was a D&D fan, but I do remember thinking he's the real deal. Okay, this is a full-on award-winning producer, animator, director. And not only did he agree to be on DragonTalk, but he wanted to come to our office to do the interview.
Nice.
And I think he even had family in the Seattle area, but I don't think he was I'm going to be visiting my family. At this time, how convenient, I'll come by. I think it was the other way around. He's I'll visit my family while I'm coming all the way up to Seattle to be on your podcast. And he stands out to me for a lot of reasons. One, I think his work is phenomenal. Two, he was so nice and kind and in person and just a very gracious guest. But I just remember how excited he was to be in our office, and that he was like a kid again, and it just brought him back. And he brought his wife, and she was amazing as well, and just so also excited on his behalf to be there. But he was like a little kid walking around a toy store, looking at all the art on the walls and meeting people. He was geeking out about meeting our coworkers, and they were but we're kind of geeking out about you right now. And it was just, he just it made me realize that no matter who you are, where you are, how many awards you've won, how many Emmys you have sitting on your bookshelf at home somewhere, D&D just gets people, it just gets people so excited. He was so incredibly passionate about this game and about the work that our team was producing, and so excited about being on the official D&D podcast that it just it made me have this whole new appreciation again for the work that we do, and that this is our day job. And this guy is a real Hollywood director is geeking out about our office and the toys that are sitting on Greg's desk, and meeting the people that I'm just making coffee with in the kitchen, oh, hey, how you doing? He's oh my God, is that Chris Perkins? Oh, it's amazing. So he was just someone that I found to be utterly delightful in his enthusiasm for D&D. And like, you just don't lose it. Like when people are so passionate about this game. And of course he credited D&D with, a lot of the creativity that he experiences every day in his job. Now he's actively playing D&D in games with other writers and directors and actors and producers in Hollywood, just like the rest of us. Like stars are just like us. They just like play D&D in their garage every Thursday night as well. So it was like a great equalizing moment for us. But I just remember feeling very, very proud about D&D and the work that we do. Just, it just makes a difference to people, no matter who they are.
It's incredible work that this game has done. I mean, I've met so many people through it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But on the topic of being or feeling proud, I guess that is something that you felt once you had the book, the physical book that you wrote in your hand.
Yes.
But what did you feel?
Yeah, I have to hold it up.
I had to hold up mine too.
We're like, oh, we got one.
I unfortunately can't hold the PDF you guys sent us.
It's a real book.
But I wanted to ask, how did it feel once you knew that you were starting to write the book? And what emotions were there? I guess there were many emotions and
fear,
different ones.
Fear. Very, very frightening.
Yeah, I think, as Shelly mentioned, we got the request to make a pitch and we made our pitch and we got accepted. And I think both of us had this moment of like, yay, got accepted. Shit. Now we have to actually write it, do all of that work that we were so excited about doing, in addition to doing the weekly podcast and what we do each day at Wizards of the Coast. It was a bit of an undertaking, I'm sure. And I'll say that I had not written a book before. Shelly has 2 other D&D centric titles under her belt. So I was really gratified to have a friend and a partner and a co-creator to be on this journey together. Like I was so inspired by Shelly and her voice and her drive to make this book, and keep writing and keep going. And I think for both of us, surprisingly enough, it was, even though we did have all those trepidation and fear going into it, the actual process of writing it was extremely fulfilling because we had each other's back. We had, oh, you're writing, so I'm going to do my essay and I'm going to do this essay. And like, it was many other projects that we have all done. I'm sure the 2 of you can relate to that. Procrastination is a real thing. You can just be like, oh, I'll do it later. I'll do it later. And I was worried about flaking. I was worried about not being able to live up to the writing that Shelly was done and all that stuff. And so the 2 of us really kind of kept each other accountable in a way that felt always positive. It never really felt negative in any way. And so a lot of those anxious emotions kind of washed away after a while. Of course, once we got closer to the deadline, they definitely boiled back up again. And we were like, oh no, we got to do this. We got to make it happen. But that happens with every project as you get closer to a deadline. But in general, the emotions around this book were super supportive and congratulatory to each other. And I think that shows in the final product.
Like a D&D party.
Like a D&D party.
Together.
I definitely agree, right? As Niels and I are also a duo that is unbreakable, like a D&D party, most of the time at least.
Never split the podcast.
Never
Don't
split
it.
No, but having someone that really has your back and producing or creating whatever you're doing, right? Niels and I are producing an actual play. I'm the game master for that one, and Niels is kind of the art director for creating art, working with other artists. So we get also a bit of art for that. And just having someone that you can basically talk to every week or every day of the week, that you can have that creative dialogue with each other. You can always help each other when you have problems. It helps so freaking much.
It really does.
Not doing something alone and really having someone that has your back. And by looking at this book that I have on my second screen right here, right now, and scrolling through it while we're talking, it's hard to actually distinguish who wrote what essay necessarily, just from looking at them at a face value at first, because they still weave all of these 200 pages together. And it all feels like one continuous feel-good story about what D&D does and what the community brings together. And if people are listening to this asking if they should buy the book once it comes out, I will say yes, because what I'm looking at here is really a great product about the inspiring community around this game. And it's really inspiring what people say and how they experience the game, how they play, and generally how it changed them as well. And yeah, now I'm just fanboying.
We'll take that endorsement. Yeah,
keep it going.
I love it.
I actually can fanboy a little bit more because DoubleDM started roughly 2 years ago. February 2021 was when we started. And when the pandemic hit, as a university student who had no job at the time, I basically was home every day of the week and had no reason to go out. Which is good when you're not wanting to catch a virus, but it's also bad if you don't know how to play D&D online yet. And I had to find out how that works and stuff like that. But one of the things that changed for me, for example, was that I enjoyed a lot more D&D content. That was roughly the time I got into Critical Role, Dimension 20, The Adventure Zone, or more of the more indie podcasts that are on the level that this podcast is on, roughly. And yeah, DragonTalk was one of these shows.
Oh, nice.
And actually, fun thing, at the end, in November 2020, or no, December, it was around Christmas time and New Year's Eve. The last Friday before Christmas, my mother came home with the unfortunate news that she has caught coronavirus.
Oh no.
And that means quarantine for everyone in the household. Basically, I had to stay inside. Now, as a university student with no job, I didn't go out much.
But even less so now.
Not gonna lie, but now it's forced staying inside. And I played a lot of video games, but also listened to a lot of podcasts. DragonTalk, Critical Role on YouTube, and everything, basically. I consumed so much D&D, and Niels at the time and I, we were basically talking 1 hour, 2 hours each day, playing video games together, but also talking about our D&D games. Because we actually, up to that point, Niels and I never played in each other's games. Never.
Oh, wow. Just once in the first one, I think.
Yeah, just in one-shots. And that means he was the perfect person I could spoiler everything in my games to, and he could do the same to me, and we could help each other. Then I was like, I want to do a podcast. Why not do this as a podcast? I mean, DragonTalk works, so why can't I do something along the lines of that? Not the same, not making a podcast about inspiring stories by people, but why not just make a show where we talk about game mastering, doing that what we do, give each other advice, and maybe have a discussion around it. And this is where we're at right now. So in the context of fanboy, I can definitely tell you guys that you were a substantial part in that you guys are actually here right now, because otherwise, if it wasn't for DragonTalk, Niels and I probably wouldn't be here talking to you guys right now.
Wow.
Probably, yeah.
That's amazing.
Yes.
So you're a big part of this, even
cool.
if you like it or not.
And now you have an episode.
I like it. I like
that
it even
is
more.
fantastic. And I think that is what I love about the D&D community is that it is not a competition. It's not someone who, I think everyone is in the same mindset where the success of one thing inspires the success of other. We're all bards. We're all giving bardic inspiration to each other each time we consume each one of our things, because we're like, oh, that's a jumping off point. Oh, that's really interesting. I might want to tweak that and use that in my game, or all those things. And it's the underlying force behind Dungeons and Dragons and the community is that each thing is additive. Each thing adds to the mix and makes things different and more interesting. And that's why I'm super important and really excited about how much we have wanted to include people from every type of marginalized community out there, because it is where this community is going to thrive. That's those new ideas, those new people coming in from different perspectives and using their different cultural stories and infusing it into all the content that D&D has been around for the last few decades. It's just making it more stronger and better and more interesting. And so I love that story. I love the fact that you guys, we'll listen to this and we'll listen to Critical Role and take our conversations and make content, make a podcast about your experiences. And then, there are people out there listening to this podcast right now who may be university students, maybe they're 15 years old. Maybe they're going to, take some of your DM advice that you've got going and put it into their games, but then maybe they'll create a podcast as well. And that's what's amazing. And then it means this interview is about a podcast, about a book, about a game, about a podcast, about a game.
Yeah.
It's several layers. It just keeps getting more and more.
Always more layers.
It's an onion.
I just want to mention it because you said, especially focusing on marginalized creators, because those stories have been suppressed so much throughout the years, and through D&D, they get the time to shine. And it fits just perfectly because just today we announced Why Your World Matters. That is something that I've been organizing with a few other friends. That is basically a world building panel that showcases why no fictional world people create is useless. There's always a story to be told. And one of the most important parts that we had for this panel really was that we create a diverse panel, because if it's just the same type of people talking about the same type of stuff, it's not going to be interesting. We need to have some people that break barriers and tell us new things that have never been told before, that have never gotten the chance to tell it before. And yeah, I think just generally D&D as a hobby can do so much of that work because it allows them to tell their stories and the things they want to tell.
Well, also the empathy that we were talking about earlier, right?
Definitely.
Like those things combined means that, and I mean it when I say it, I think people are better people when they play Dungeons and Dragons because exactly what you're saying. Like you're getting exposed to new stories, you're getting exposed to walking in other people's shoes. That's beautiful. You don't get that really in any other facet of people's lives.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, and now I am back in it again. I have to break us up a bit because looking at the time, we're close to the end. But I have one final question for you two. It is, what would be the most unconventional game mastering advice you would give to someone? Just on the top of your head.
Unconventional.
Don't worry about rules. Just don't make it up. I always like to have snacks, like a lot of snacks now. So
yes,
if they remember nothing else, they're just like, oh, the food was so good. Food, is that part of D&D? Yeah, I guess. I don't know. Like, yeah, that's it. I just feed food and drink. Just get them, just like with any party, an adventuring party, a dinner party, a cocktail party, doesn't matter. Food and drink.
Food and drink is where it's at. I don't know how unconventional this is, but it's something that feels a little bit outside the box, which is create an adventure around a prop. Have a physical thing that is weird, that is interesting of its own right, and just use that in your game to give it to your players as a real physical thing that they can touch and manipulate, and then the fantasy of being these characters washes away because suddenly they are their characters because they're just as inquisitive of what this thing is. So that can be as simple as a bag of coins. Like sometimes that's just something I have in my dice bag. If I'm DMing, I'll just be like, all right. And they throw it this bag, and having that clink and they have that metal kind of touch together. Like somehow that just brings everything into this sharp relief and can be super fun. So don't estimate the power of props in your game.
I love that.
I will steal that. I will definitely do that.
It is definitely unconventional and I love it.
Amazing. Yeah.
So we have reached the end, but there's one last thing to do. And that is for you guys to shout out social media, tell us when the book releases, where people can buy it, where people can order it, and do some acknowledgements that if you want to, just get it all out there now.
Get it out.
Well, Welcome to DragonTalk is available for pre-order right now. You can get it from the University of Iowa Press, their website. One great way to do it. You can get it through other online retailers. But we love if you have a local bookstore that you love to go into and browse for books, talk to the people there and see if they can stock Welcome to DragonTalk if they can, and try to buy it through your local bookseller. I think that would be fantastic as well. Maybe they can order more than one copy, and so they get it on the shelves based on all of your love. And, say that there's a lot of D&D fans in your local community, and I'm sure they will buy it too. If we are anywhere near that, I'd love to come in and do a signing. But of course, that is a little bit difficult now with all the pandemic things that are
especially
happening.
That we are also in Germany.
I'm always looking for an excuse to travel abroad.
Believe me.
That's it. I hear you guys have good, wine and beer and food there. So let's make it happen. But yeah, that's the everything about where to get Welcome to DragonTalk. It officially publishes on December 5th, but we are told if you pre-order it, you might actually get it early, up to a month early. So get those pre-orders in now, and you can get it hopefully in November. But I think this makes a really good gift for someone in your life who is a D&D fan. Of course, they will love all the stories within here, but I think it's also really good for people who are D&D curious or want to know more, or someone who just doesn't understand why D&D is so exciting. Get them this book, and I hope this will explain it. It's not too long. As you said, it's only about 200 pages. They don't need to read every single essay in there, but I think even some of the introductory parts, as well as the folks who are working, more recognizable, like Joe Manganiello and Deborah Enwall and Matthew Lillard, some of the interviews that we have in here, their stories will inspire people to be like, maybe I do want to pick up this game. Maybe I do want to get something out of it. So that's that's my spiel. You can follow me at Greg Tito on Twitter, Greg_Tito on Instagram. Shelly, I'm going to throw it to you because I know you only got 1 minute left.
I am at Shelly Moo on Twitter and Instagram. And of course, you can listen to Dragon Talk wherever you listen to your podcasts. They're just like this one. So if you haven't started listening, we have about 7 years of episodes for you to dive into.
And they are all great.
And then you can read the book about the podcast
About the game.
about that game. But anyway,
Thank you so much for having us on, you guys. This was fantastic.
Delightful.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah. And with that,
It's been wonderful.
Bye-bye, audience. Hear you on the next one. And bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.